What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Today we are looking at the new Iraq map by Eagle Dynamics for DCS World, and I want to answer three main questions. One, how good is it really as a new map? Obviously it's been developed using the latest technology that Eagle Dynamics has on offer for map development, so I'm very curious to find out how good it is at low level, high level, medium level, and in general in terms of detail, villages, towns, vegetation. How is it overall? Secondly, I presume that there will be a number of people who are probably interested in the Iraq map, probably sitting on the sidelines, maybe unsure if they want the Iraq map or the Afghanistan map, or perhaps they already have the Afghanistan map and they are wondering if they should also acquire the Iraq map. And I think a lot of those people will be those engaged in counter-terrorism operations in DCS World. And finally, my third question, which is the one closest to my heart for sure, is do we finally have a map in DCS World that is amazing to fly low level in a fast jet? Now, some previous maps we've had were pretty decent. The Syria map is certainly one of them, and even the old Caucasus map with Bartes Caucasus redone textures actually looks pretty awesome, and it's free as well. However, since then we've had some pretty terrible maps for flying low level. That would be the Kola map and the South Atlantic map. Those are absolutely unbearable. Every time I even try to fly low level in between mountains or of some sort of valleys in those maps, I feel like I'm in Flight Simulator 2002. So today we're going to see if the Iraq map is going to be the one to have for those of us who absolutely love flying fast and low.
We have 2 good engine starts. You're clear to disconnect the headset. We'll see you on the left with the pin. Thanks a lot.
Now, it's worth bearing in mind that the Iraq map is in early access at the moment, just as is the Afghanistan map, and therefore we are expecting to see large portions of the map which are unfinished, and I think that's absolutely fine. So we're going to try and concentrate today, instead of showing you too much of all those patches which look, pretty terrible, just because simply they haven't been worked on. I've discovered a whole bunch of areas on the map, on the northern Iraq map, which are very flyable and do seem to be at least more or less finished. So I think we should just start off with how does it look up high? Well, up high the map really looks amazing. I think if anything probably the best looking mountains up high that I've ever seen. But then again, any map in DCS, even the most terrible maps such as I mentioned before, the Kola map and the South Atlantic map, I mean they all look amazing at high level as well. So if you're the sort of person that just wants to go shoot BVR missiles at high altitude, it doesn't really matter what you go for. They all look great. The Iraq map certainly no exception. At medium level, I think it's still stunning, even where some maps start to look a little bit meh and a little bit gamey, whereas this one actually retains a lot of that real life looking appeal, with the mountains having that sort of the crevices and the shadows. They don't look like they're painted on. They genuinely do feel and look very realistic. In my opinion, certainly the most realistic mountains we've ever had in DCS World. As we get lower and lower, we'll start to notice that texture resolutions will start to become a bit more obvious, that they're just not that sharp. And I wish they were sharper, I genuinely do, but I think it's a limitation of basically all maps we have in DCS. I have to say this one at low level does feel a lot better than a lot of the other stuff that I've come across, certainly when it comes to vegetation. And in fact, vegetation specifically is something that they have done a great job on. All the bushes, trees, and everything that they have here, the flora and fauna, not only do they look extremely realistic, just the 3D models of all these trees, but they actually really fit the map really well. And I think having them scattered all around the area makes it for more interesting flying as opposed to when you're flying on a pure barren landscape. And to be honest, the texture resolutions aren't bad, they could be better. But honestly, it's really enjoyable. One thing I do wish could be a little bit better is definitely all the coastlines and anything where there are edges with water and land. They just look unbelievably sharp and very unrealistic, unless when it comes to canals, in which case it kind of makes sense. But that's something that Media has been extremely good at in the Syria map. They've created some fantastic looking coastlines, so it's definitely doable in DCS. But I just wish that Eagle Dynamics had learned a little bit from them. Now let's talk a little bit about the towns and villages. What I found is that large areas and cities are modeled pretty well. They're quite believable, and I think at medium level they look great, high level they look amazing, but when you get lower down, I think it starts to maybe break down a little bit compared to some of the best maps that we have. Certainly something like the Marianas Islands, which I guess is a little bit of an exception, but also certainly the Afghanistan map, I think, has absolutely nailed all the little details, all the little backyards, all the crap lying around in different places and areas, and you can kind of tell that this map hasn't been developed by the same people, and I actually kind of wish that it was, because when it comes to vegetation, mountains, it's pretty brilliant, but when it comes to representing villages, towns, and buildings, I find that even in areas which are relatively finished, it appears like the buildings have been kind of plumped into the middle of nowhere at some random angle, doesn't really fit in with the textures, and they're kind of missing a lot of the little details that the Afghanistan map is so good for, with, like I say, all the clutter everywhere, and I genuinely feels like in the Afghanistan map, all of that really belongs and is built in so beautifully into the area. Whereas here, it really feels like it's been stuck on or thrown on. Now, granted, it's early access, maybe they're going to fix that. When it comes to large populated areas, a little bit better. Certainly feels like you are in a very densely packed city, and I can't really complain too much. I still think the Afghanistan map wins in that respect, even when it comes to highly populated areas. But certainly, when it comes to villages, I've never come across a single decent looking village anywhere in the mountains. They all look houses just kind of thrown on in the middle of nowhere. It doesn't really look very nice. But even in the lowlands and in the valleys, where, like I say, it looks like the map is kind of finished-ish, just doesn't look great. The buildings are just randomly placed at some weird angles. It just doesn't fit in with the terrain. When it comes to air bases and airports, I have to say, again, the Iraq map is definitely lacking a little bit, certainly compared to the Afghanistan map at this point. And I feel like there's a lot of detail, a lot of clutter missing from all these airports and air bases, and also a lot of the buildings just don't seem like they integrate all that well with the satellite imagery underneath them. So again, I think a lot of room for improvement in that respect. However, totally usable air bases. Can't say that it is awful. It could be better. Now let's finally move on to the low-level flying fast jet part of the video. Now, as you've probably noticed, I'm actually a couple of days behind on this, let's call it, review of the Iraq map compared to all the other DCS YouTubers. And the reason for that is actually because I've spent so much time simply exploring the map, trying to figure out the best lower level route to show you all in the mountains that really demonstrates all the good qualities about this map. So I was looking for an area that's sort of relatively finished, that's got good level of textures and detail and mesh, and I think I've come up with a really good one. So this is it. You can have a look and you can fly it yourself. Just remember where it is on the map if you have the Iraq map yourself. So we'll do the low level route, and after that we'll draw some conclusions about that experience and also answer the 3 questions that I posed at the beginning. And here we go, the entry point into the low-level route following this river through this steep ravine. And you'll find that this map actually has a lot of options for flying low-level when it comes to steep ravines and mountainous terrain, unlike a lot of other maps. Even the Syria map, which has a fair amount of mountainous terrain, actually doesn't have all that many options of flying in through ravines and valleys, being surrounded by mountains on both sides, of course flying low-level routes. The Caucasus map is pretty good, but it's pretty old, although I have to say still to this day the densely packed forests on that map have not been surpassed for me by any other map. Certainly not the Polar map or the South Atlantic map, which you would have thought should have very tightly packed coniferous forests, but unfortunately, they kind of suck. So the Caucasus map at the moment, for if you want some forest, some proper dense forest, the Caucasus map is the way to go. Certainly not the Iraq map, but as you can see with these trees, which are kind of sparsely populated in this area, it looks pretty awesome, and it really gives a great perception of speed and low level, which is not something you get when you're flying over some flat terrain with low resolution texture. So the upside of having these trees everywhere in this vegetation, which I have to say they absolutely nailed. They nailed the way it looks, I think, and the upside of it, even if you had some fairly low resolution textures underneath, is that you actually feel a sense of speed. But as you can tell, the mesh is actually pretty good on these maps. The mountains definitely look like they have various crevices, and you know, they're just not flat like you would see in a lot of other maps with some painted on textures. It really does genuinely feel very three-dimensional, which is great as we fly this F1 painted in Iraqi colors, of course. And unfortunately, this brings me on to another point about this map, which is a little bit of a negative. And just as with the Afghanistan map, both of these maps are catered towards the modern times, because the air bases that you'll find in them are all effectively allied bases built within the last 10 to 15 years. And unfortunately, if you want to replicate some of the conflicts that Iraq was involved in before, and you want to fly the F1 for the Iraqi Air Force, well, you'd have to use your imagination, because as far as I know, currently there are no plans to implement the sort of older bases that Iraq used to have, and wipe all the modern American bases off the face of this map, simply to cater for those older times, unfortunately. Now we're getting into the part of the route that is absolutely my favorite as we follow this river, and it starts to get a little bit steeper and steeper with the ravines and the valleys. I think I have to say, flying low level on this map has been greatly enjoyable. Is it as good as I was hoping? I want to say it's like 90% there. I feel like maybe still the texture resolutions could be a little bit better, but it's very well integrated, I have to say, certainly unlike some of the other maps I keep mentioning, which I think are pretty terrible. I do think it's really enjoyable flying low level, and I do know that there is a limitation in DCS World as to the maximum texture resolution size for terrains and maps, and therefore I think we're just kind of limited and we're stuck with this until Eagle Dynamics creates a brand new terrain engine technology. I think this is probably as good as we're ever going to get. And to be fair, it is very good. I think you'll find that there's a lot less artifacts when it comes to mountains as well. I think you'll find on other maps that just have these vertical sort of faces sticking out randomly. And I have to say, there's a couple of them here, but they're very few and far between, so they really genuinely don't ruin the experience of flying low level at all. And I really think it's time to draw some conclusions after having spent a little bit of time flying around on this map. So first of all, is it a good map overall? Yes, I think it's a good map overall, but I do think that certainly in terms of the absolute best level of detail when it comes to low level buildings, clutter, and terrain, I think the Afghanistan map and the Marianas Islands map take the prize for that. But overall, I think it's very good, and it's got good potential. It's certainly early access, so I'm sure a lot of this stuff will get improved. Certainly in terms of the mountains, it's amazing. And like I say, I do think when it comes to flying the low level specifically, I think some parts of the Syria map is still amazing. Certainly that ridge north edge of Cyprus is absolutely amazing when you fly around there. And the Caucasus map, still around the Darial Gorge with Bartek's Caucasus redone. And it's a completely free map that you can use, and I still think it looks bloody amazing even by today's standards, although certainly you can tell that the mountains are nowhere near as detailed, and I really wish that Eagle Dynamics actually used this technology and redid the Georgia map, the Caucasus map, because I think that is such a fantastic place for so many different missions that you can fathom of, you know, both the Cold War era and modern times. I think it'd be great if they could employ that map technology and redo that map completely as well. But having said that, I do think this is a good map. If you are one of those people that is on the sidelines, you trying to choose between the Afghanistan map and the Iraq map, specifically for flying helicopters, low level sort of stuff, definitely go for the Afghanistan map. Yes, the Afghanistan map has massive gaps in areas which are modeled, but it's actually pretty awesome. Compared to this one, I think it's definitely better, certainly when it comes to buildings, clutter, kind of any sort of populated areas. Afghanistan map wins. When it comes to low-level flying, no question, I think this map is the better one for that. Certainly when it comes to fast jets. When it comes to helicopters in very confined areas which are modeled, the Afghanistan map is still, for me, probably the one to have. Overall, I think it's definitely a thumbs up for me, although I think its current state needs a little bit of work in a lot of areas, just as is the case with the Afghanistan map, so I'm looking forward to further improvements, but it's very flyable. There's certainly a lot of missions that could be done here at this time already, so I hope that helps some of you make a decision. So hopefully you've enjoyed this little overview. If you have any questions, just comment them down below, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Adios.